All right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, it's not quite a new movie. It's a movie from last year that just so happened to win Best Picture at this year's Oscars. We are covering CODA, which we kind of let slide by back when it first came out. But since it won Best Picture, we figured we should probably give it another look. And joining me is Ryan Pack from Soundtrack Your Life. We have a great conversation coming up. We get into everything we liked, everything we didn't like about CODA, but we talk about all of it. So a lot of good stuff coming up, lots of puzzle pieces. And before we get to that, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. You know, I'm recording this, it's April 5th. I've had more downloads in April than I had all of last month. I don't understand how that happens. I appreciate that there are people out there maybe just finding the show for the first time, maybe going back and downloading lots of old episodes. If you're out there, you're listening, you enjoy the show, thank you so much for being here. Make sure you're subscribed so that way you'll get all the new episodes as they come out. We're, of course, available on all the podcast apps. And if you like what we do here on the show, rate and review us. 5 stars would be nice. You can also follow us on social media at PiecingPod. And if you want to join a fun little community of people who talk about movies, no trolls allowed, none of that shit posting crap, join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we talk about all the movies we talk about here on the show and everything else going on in the world of movies. Last but not least, before we get to the conversation, I do want to remind you, we do have a Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I combine content from Piecing It Together, from Awesome Movie Year, which is another movie podcast that I produce, and from my music career, because I am a music composer as well as somebody who spends hours and hours and hours of their week watching movies and podcasting about them. So you can find lots of great stuff over there. It's patreon.com/bydavidrosen. For as little as $3 a month, you get access to advanced episodes, bonus content, all kinds of fun stuff. And there's other tiers you could check out as well. So again, patreon.com/bydavidrosen. And let's talk about CODA. All right, so joining me to talk about the Little Sundance movie that won the Oscar is Ryan Pack from Soundtrack Your Life. Ryan, how's it going?
Doing great. How are you?
I am great. I'm ready to talk about the Best Picture winner, CODA. Before we get to CODA, though, it is your first time on the show. Why don't you tell people a little about you and what you do?
So my name is Ryan. I host Soundtrack Your Life. It's a podcast where we cover soundtracks and why they're important to us. So, a soundtrack may have inspired you to do great creative work like David has, or, may have gotten you into a specific band. There's just so many different ways a soundtrack can influence your life. So that's what my podcast is about.
Absolutely. And I had fun talking about Ex-Machina on there just recently. And yeah, it's a great show. And yes, soundtracks can be very influential on a person's life and can make or break movies. So, I mean, it's definitely a great subject matter to talk about at length. And I'm sure music will come up in this conversation here about CODA. As we were just kind of joking about before we hit record, I didn't love CODA the first time I watched it. I just recently rewatched it. I definitely liked it more the second time. How were you feeling about this movie leading up to the Oscars? Were you a big fan of it on its first release?
So I probably watched it about a month ago.
Okay.
And I knew it was nominated for Best Picture, but I knew almost nothing about it. I think I knew that deafness and a deaf family played a part of the film. But I was basically just like, let's press play and see what happens.
Sure.
So it was kind of interesting to watch it kind of with very little knowledge.
Yeah.
And so originally when I was watching it, it kind of confused me that it was nominated for Best Picture because it just seems to be such a familiar tale, such a kind of smaller scale story.
Right. Yeah.
But it's also a movie that I feel like kind of exceeds kind of the familiar tropes that are introduced.
Yeah.
And it has a lot of, I don't want to call it subversive stuff, but it's a little bit richer of a story than it leads you to believe at first, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's fair for sure. And I don't usually do this, but I had and I wish I wrote down who it was that compiled this little list of facts. I did not, but I wrote down from a tweet I had seen a week ago, like right after the Oscar win, a couple of interesting facts about CODA as an Oscar winner. Obviously, first film led by deaf actors to win a Best Picture. Also, first film to win Best Picture without nominations for director or editing since the 30s. Lowest number of nominations for a Best Picture winner since the 30s. Also, the first film, obviously, released by a streaming service to win Best Picture, which is crazy. And then also, first Sundance film to win Best Picture, which I was really surprised by that one because, I don't know, maybe the idea of like award winner, maybe it's just not Oscars that we're thinking of, but I don't know. I always think of Sundance movies as the kind of movies that do, perform well at award shows and things like that. And I don't know, just a lot of interesting stuff around this movie. Whereas the movie itself, I didn't find that interesting on first watch. I was just like, it's just a nice movie, kind of like, what you were kind of talking about, some familiar area with the family stuff. But, when it comes down to it, there's a lot of really interesting stuff about the movie itself and about its win that I think, while I still, it wouldn't be towards the top of my list of the Best Picture nominees this year, I think it's an interesting win and not necessarily a bad win.
Yeah, I agree. This isn't a Green Book sort of win.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely not a Green Book win, that's for sure. So let's start getting into some puzzle pieces, and we'll get into what we liked and didn't like and all that stuff along the way. But what do you have for your first piece here for CODA?
So I'm going to give full disclosure. I am Korean American.
Mm-hmm.
So my first piece is Minari.
All right.
So the 2020 Lee Isaac Chung film. I think with a lot of the family story, I think it's almost kind of like a spiritual sequel to Minari, where you have this family-run business that's struggling. It's not, they're not immigrants, but I feel like in a lot of ways, they're kind of seen as the other, even though they're a white family. And there's a lot of parallels, I think, to being like from an immigrant family running a business where Ruby is heckled for like kind of the language barrier of her parents having sex.
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of people from immigrant families are used to being teased in school for, their parents and how they speak because they're not, because English is not their first language. I think the struggle between, working at the family business with school and their social life, I think that's something that's also very relatable. And then even sacrificing school for the family business, like with Asian Americans, I feel like they're encouraged to go to college, but I think sometimes kids are kind of forced to stay closer to home because there's a family business involved. So I think in a lot of ways it's kind of like the family in Minari, and I think in both films, there's kind of a need to embrace the community around them for them to kind of thrive.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great first piece. I hadn't thought of it, but yeah, that works really well for that whole family unit. And I mean that, even though this is, the movie that is identified most as being, about deaf people and about music, I think family then would be the other main thing here, and family business and being kind of stuck in those responsibilities of being a part of the family. And yeah, I think Minari is a great example of that as well. Also, speaking about soundtracks, I mean, come on, that's one of the best scores of the last few years. So good, Emil Masseri's score. But yeah, no, that's a really good one, and I like that idea that you bring to it of it being almost like an immigrant story, just without actually being immigrants. It's a different kind of like angle and different kind of family than we're used to seeing, and that makes for a really interesting story.
Yeah, I mean, I had like my parents didn't have a family business, but I grew up with a lot of kids who kind of came from what I would feel like be a similar background where, I was like, what are you doing after school? Like, I'm working at my parents' market or the dry cleaners or the donut shop. And, I definitely feel like I've known people like that, like in that family.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, but before I move on to my first puzzle piece, I guess I'll bring this up. I was going to bring it up later, but my best friend Q had a theory as to why I didn't like CODA as much the first time I watched it, and it actually kind of speaks to that point because the story of a person from like an overbearing family who expects her to be a part of their family's entire business and kind of at their beck and call at all times for everything they do. That's kind of my life and my family's record store, and helping my parents with any and everything. I mean, I'm a very blessed person, but at the same time, I basically am on call around the clock for their store and everything surrounding the store. And I mean, there's not a better job you can have than working for your family's record store, but it still can be a drag at times when it's really your mind is made up for you by other people,
Right.
you know.
So might have hit a little too close to home for you.
I think so. I think it kind of did in a lot of ways. So I'll go into my first piece, which is actually from 2017, The Glass Castle from Destin Daniel Cretton, who recently did Shang-Chi, based on Jeanette Wallace's memoir about a dysfunctional family. It's a drama basically about a kind of nonconformist husband and wife who just refuses to fit into regular society. And it's the parents are Woody Harrelson and Naomi Watts. And the oldest daughter is played by Brie Larson. She's who the story was written by, that character. And she wants out of this lifestyle of just kind of roaming the country and just kind of doing whatever comes to the parents' mind, and not really like ever settling in or moving on to bigger and better things. And that push-pull of family and of what's expected of you, and trying to kind of forge your own way in the world, but not wanting to separate yourself from your family because of your family and you love them. Both, I think, kind of a little bit heavy-handed stories, but at the same time, they both do deal with that very relatable thing, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I actually have another puzzle piece from 2017,
Okay.
and that is Greta Gerwig's Lady Bird.
Sure, absolutely. That's on my list as well, but I will give that one to you. What do you got on Lady Bird?
So I thought of Lady Bird immediately because when I started to understand the story of CODA and where it was going, I tried to think of like the last Best Picture that was kind of just a coming of age story that was very straightforward, kind of like this film.
Mhm.
And so immediately Lady Bird came to mind.
Yeah.
And I think, the relationship with the mother is very similar. I think also there's kind of that shame of like where she's from. She hates taking people back to her house. And I think in Lady Bird, she offhandedly tells someone like, I live on the wrong side of the tracks.
Mhm. Yeah.
And, and while Ruby is very like protective of her family, she's also a little ashamed of like where she lives.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of that not necessarily earned shame around the families in both movies, and I would say more so here in CODA, because this family is just full of just burping and farting and grossness and just all this stuff. So and all the sex stuff, and like I could get where Ruby is coming from here. Not so much Lady Bird. Lady Bird kind of needs to suck it up and deal with the fact that her parents are pretty cool, actually. But yeah, definitely there's a lot between these main characters and that push pull, love hate relationship with both of their families. So yeah, I think that's definitely one worth having in this conversation. I'll go to my next one, which I think is maybe an obvious one to bring up in this conversation, but from just a couple of years ago, The Sound of Metal, another movie that deals with deafness and how it intersects with music, which I guess, as a hearing person, I wouldn't really, think immediately to tell a story of that intersection between music and deafness. But I guess it makes a lot of sense because music is such a big, rich part of everybody else's lives. Why wouldn't it have such a big impact on people who can't hear as well? And there's a lot of interesting things that you like learn from both of these movies, like the parents loving gangster rap because of the bass music shaking the car. I mean, that makes so much sense, And then in Sound of Metal, I mean, feeling those drums banging and hitting through the reverberations, and so it makes a lot of sense how somebody who can't necessarily hear could still get something out of that. And so there's a lot between the two movies that deal with how deaf people can still get stuff out of music.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think also, just to add one other thing, both movies play with sound design for, emotional effect and resonance. Obviously I'd say, the most emotional moment of this movie, CODA, would be during the performance at the end when all the sound cuts out and you kind of see or hear, what the parents are hearing and the fact that they're not hearing anything and kind of how difficult that would be. That playing with sound and sound design and sound editing was a major thing for Sound of Metal as well. And so I think it goes to show how you kind of tell a story in this world.
Right. And it's also worth bringing up that CODA, while also a musical term, is also an acronym for Child of Deaf Adults.
Right, absolutely. Which that's pretty cool. I I definitely like that about the movie. It's a great title.
Yeah, and it's one of those like little secret things about the film where you're like, oh, this is like better thought out than I originally thought.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. One of those little moments where you're like, oh, okay, maybe there's a little more going on here than I thought. So yeah, for sure. So what do you got for your next piece?
So for my next piece, and this is probably my biggest critique of the movie, I'm going to go with Richard Linklater's 2003 School of Rock.
Okay.
So kind of the biggest issue with this movie, I think, is the choir scenes and the music teacher, Mr. Villalobos, I believe is his name, Mr. V.
Bernardo.
And I know that Sean Heder, I think, has said in an interview that he is kind of an amalgamation of some teachers she's had, but as like a high school, public school music teacher, he's pretty over the top. He's shaming kids in Massachusetts about not being able to roll their R's. And then he's having them learn Let's Get It On by Marvin Gaye and then telling them that, I know this is what you guys think about all the time.
Very strange choice. Very strange.
A lot of Marvin Gaye in this movie. Kind of weird. I mean, I love Marvin Gaye. My first dance was All I Need.
Nice.
At my wedding, but I am an adult.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's like it's the one part of the movie where I think it'll turn whether you like it or hate it. Like if he's too much, you can't enjoy this movie.
Yeah. I agree. Definitely the biggest problem with the movie are pretty much any scenes that take place in the school, I would say. Like whether it's Mr. Bernardo or whether it's just how kind of a lot of people have kind of leveled the Disney Channel or ABC Family criticism at this, feeling like one of those kind of made for TV movies. Everything in the school is where I think things kind of fall apart a little bit. Everything with those choir practice and all that stuff. Definitely where the problems come in. I like using School of Rock as the puzzle piece for this, for bringing up this, because yeah, I mean, Jack Black rules, and that's kind of where I think that's the good version of this, whereas this is the bad version of that. But yeah, and I do think that is a really weird choice, having Marvin Gaye be the song that these kids are singing. There's definitely a lot of weird choices going on with Mr. Bernardo, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he might as well be teaching the kids like The Doors.
Yeah,
like Jack Black's character is doing. Like,
yeah, like why not? Yeah, might as well. Well, I'll go with a TV show. Since I just brought up that criticism, the whole ABC Family Disney thing, I'll go with the Freeform TV show Switched at Birth. Which actually does kind of deal with similar CODA situation of mixed family with some members that are hearing and some that aren't. And I actually watched part of this. My wife watched the show. She watched the whole thing. I didn't watch the whole show, but I saw a bunch of episodes of it. And kind of deals with the same thing, the push-pull of family, of wanting to go out and, make your own life and not wanting to be just stuck with family the whole time, and with the struggles and issues that deaf people deal with trying to, go out into the world and deal with school and friends and all the things that young people deal with in college and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of the same issues being dealt with, and I don't have, aside from having Sound of Metal on my puzzle piece list here, I haven't seen other movies that deal necessarily with deaf characters. And I mean, I know there certainly are some, but there's none that I've either seen recently enough or at all to bring up here. So that's really kind of like the best one that I have as like a reference point to those kinds of characters.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, I would have to go through Marlee Matlin's IMDb to see what other movies I've seen that have deaf people.
Right. Yeah. Like Children of the Lesser God, of course, but there's not a lot of representation. And that's one thing that, even if we are dealing with the, hearing daughter of a deaf family here as the main character, it still is some of the best representation we've had for that kind of thing in this kind of story.
And I think that's kind of the point of the movie and why it's so unassuming is look how easy it is to integrate a deaf family into a film.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it really shouldn't be that hard. But what do you have for your next piece?
So this one is a little bit of a stretch, but my next piece is Mike Mills's 2005 Thumbsucker.
Okay, I saw this when it came out. I don't really remember it that well.
Yeah, it's a much weirder, darker coming of age film, but that one is set in Oregon. This one is set in Massachusetts, but in both films, there's like a scene of like romance in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
So in this film, Ruby takes, I believe his name is Nathan.
It sounds right, yeah. The one character I didn't write down his name.
He doesn't matter, really.
Yeah.
And, so she takes him out and then they jump into the river or that lake off the cliff. And in Thumbsucker, like, I remember that the main character has this crush on a girl and she becomes all jaded because she gets kicked off the debate team and, like, they fool around in the forest and then she tells him that it's just like an experiment. And then he basically tells her off. And I feel like they both kind of have like this discarded romance in the wilderness. Like, I mean, she kind of stays with the guy, but when she goes to college, she just goes with her friend and he's never mentioned again. Like, he's just kind of there to fill some plot holes.
Yeah. I guess she got to do some things away from her family and that was basically it. And now so much for that. That was just passing the time.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. Thumbsucker, I'm going to have to rewatch that one of these days. Like I said, I haven't seen it since back when it came out, but I remember liking it back then. So I'll go to another piece here. I'm going to go back to Mr. Bernardo and trash him a little bit more. I'm going to go with Whiplash for my next puzzle piece. Of course, J.K. Simmons just incredible performance as overbearing teacher, music teacher specifically, who just absolutely requires the utmost perfection out of his students. And, that just a fantastic performance, fantastic character. Not so much for Mr. Bernardo, but it also, and we have already kind of started talking about this a little bit, but maybe part of that is because this is in high school and these are high school kids and like you really shouldn't be teaching your students that way in high school. I mean, it's just completely insane. Everything that he does with basically embarrassing these kids in front of the class is just it's borderline abuse. And it's okay for college kids. Screw college kids. They can be abused by their teacher a little bit, but high school kids, let's draw a line.
Yeah, and even with his private sessions with Ruby, he's yelling at her for being late. Like she was working for her parents and their fishing business.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot going on. Like she's going to hearings on their behalf and interpreting things for them. Like I would assume most people would give her a pass.
Yeah. Seriously, a pass, and a little borderline problematic to be yelling at a teenager in private like that. That's not cool, So yeah, but Whiplash, awesome movie.
He's like the Disney Channel version of J.K. Simmons in this movie.
Yeah, there you go. That's exactly right. So, all right, what do you got next?
So we're gonna keep talking about him.
All right.
So this puzzle piece is Paul White's 2002 film About a Boy.
Okay.
So it's another kind of coming of age film. I mean, I guess we're just gonna do a lot of coming of age films.
I mean, come on, that's what this movie is. Yeah.
It also ends with a big musical number,
Mm-hmm.
and it gets interrupted by, quote, a mentor figure, unquote. So in 2002, Marcus is singing Killing Me Softly at his school talent show, and Hugh Grant's Will kind of intervenes by coming out with a guitar and kind of distracting from the fact that this kid is singing an incredibly lame song at his talent show.
Sure.
And in CODA, Ruby is about to just blow her audition, and then Mr. V shows up.
Yeah.
And somehow it's fine that he kicks out the piano player. He just gives his credentials. I'm class of 89.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to make this whole audition a joke.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a crowd pleaser. You got to do stuff like that in crowd pleasing movies.
Which is crazy because when she starts singing and she sees her parents in the balcony, which I also think is probably not okay for an audition.
Probably not.
When she starts, singing and signing, and I guess we're just doing all spoilers in this movie, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Go spoil away.
It's great, right? It's such the endorphins just started releasing into my brain.
Yeah,
and it's such a kind of cliche movie moment for them to elevate it and to stick the landing.
Mm-hmm.
Is so impressive.
Yeah.
I just remember watching her do that and thinking, this audition will get you into any college in America if you submitted that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would hope so. I would hope so because why wouldn't people when I'm talking about a movie, we could be a little bit more jaded and stuff about moments like this, but in real life, don't people want to feel good? Don't people want to be happy for people?
Yeah, and they stick the landing on that. It's so it's a crowd pleasing movie, but the fact that it's coming and it still makes you feel good, that's actually pretty impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree there. My final piece kind of piggybacks right off of that moment right there, which is kind of an obvious one to bring up whenever we talk about dysfunctional families in a movie, but it is Little Miss Sunshine, which kind of is the exact same kind of feeling here of the whole dysfunctional family that sticks together in the end, all leading towards some kind of big talent performance. In that case, a dance where the dance is awful, but all the family comes and makes fools out of themselves with her to make her feel okay. And Little Miss Sunshine here, kind of like what you were just talking about, she's up there to do her singing performance, and it's not quite going well. Mr. Bernardo shows up, and all works out in the end, and everybody's happy and everybody is good. And these kind of movies, they are built to make people happy, and they succeed at doing that. And I think I don't know why this one always seems to be the one that comes up whenever talking about these kinds of families and movies, but it really does feel like a perfect example of it.
Also a big Sundance winner.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it goes along with the idea of Sundance movie is kind of like these little movies that could kind of scenarios.
So I kind of have a bonus puzzle piece here.
Okay, let's do it.
And I think it's mostly just because of a GIF that's on the internet, but I got a little bit of Forrest Gump.
Okay.
Just with, for me, the best scenes are with the fishing community.
Sure.
And I know when they won the Oscar, they actually made a point to thank the Gloucester fishing community.
Mm.
And there's just something really nice about those scenes like that. I just get that vision of Tom Hanks waving on the boat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I some of my fondest memories of Forrest Gump, I haven't seen it in a while, but some of my fondest memories are the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company scenes.
Nice.
And I think I get a lot of that from that community, and I think it's a big reason why the movie works.
Do you think we're gonna see like chain theme restaurants of like fish restaurants with like a Troy Kotsur lookalike that shows up and is like farting and smoking weed and stuff like that by your table? Do you think that'll happen one of these days? Maybe.
It'll be a shame if it doesn't.
There you go. So our finished puzzle here for CODA includes Minari, The Glass Castle, Ladybird, Sound of Metal, School of Rock, Switched at Birth, Thumbsucker, Whiplash, About a Boy, Little Miss Sunshine, and Forrest Gump. Do you have any other thoughts that you wanted to get to that we didn't quite get to while going through puzzle pieces?
Well, I just think it's funny that they take a shot at Glee when those high school choir scenes totally feel like Glee.
Yeah, I know. That was on my my potential overall puzzle piece list here. It was Glee, but I've never actually watched Glee, so I decided not to bring it up. So, but yeah, why not take shots? I mean, it's Glee; they could take it, you know.
Yeah, let's make fun of Glee and then have everyone sing "Happy Birthday."
Yeah. Yeah, I think we basically covered it. I do think, as much as, like I said at the top of the show, that, it might not even been my first, second, third, fourth, fifth pick for Best Picture. I mean, I think I liked it a lot more the second time. I do think Troy Kotsur is a very deserved win for his supporting actor win. Definitely my favorite part of the movie, and a great performance there. Marlee Matlin, always good.
Yes.
Yeah. So awesome. Ryan, do you have any other movies you watched recently you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
No, I had to watch Wild Wild West for another podcast, and I would not recommend that to other listeners.
No. Yeah, not great. But I don't think it's as bad as some people make it out to be. It's got its moments, but
It's not very funny for a action comedy.
No, not very funny.
But because everyone is so talented in the movie, it's watchable.
Yeah. That's one of those movies where the behind the scenes is like as important, if not more important than what actually happens in the movie. It's like, paying attention to all the stories. That's where it gets really fun. But,
right.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Ryan, thank you so much for doing the show. Why don't you tell people where they can find you and your podcast?
We can be found anywhere where you listen to your podcasts. But if you're interested in following us on social, we're on Twitter at soundtrack_your, Instagram at soundtrackcast, and soundtrackyourlife.net if you want to visit our website and if you want to be a guest.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, again, thank you so much for joining me here. Thank you for talking me into doing a CODA episode. I think it's a worthwhile episode for us to have done.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm glad I got to be on the show.
I'm Josh Bell.
And I'm Jason Harris, and we co-host a podcast called Awesome Movie Year.
Each season, we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year.
We deep dive into these specific years, and we pick out why they were such great years for films. We go over the biggest hits, the biggest flops, the best picture, some personal picks, some cult classics.
Years we've covered in past seasons include 1994, 2003, 1977, and 1984, and we've got all of film history to look forward to. So check us out at awesomemovieyear.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about CODA. Thanks to Ryan for joining me on that one. Had a good time talking about CODA, and I'm glad I gave it a second chance. It's not bad. Not my favorite, but definitely not bad. So, yeah, thank you to you for listening to the show. I hope you enjoy what you hear here. I hope you enjoy what you hear here. I hope you enjoy what you hear here on the podcast. Tongue twisting myself here. Make sure you're subscribed if you do like what you hear here. You can subscribe, of course, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, all the big ones. There's also, of course, Good Pods. There's Podchaser, lots of podcast apps. Whichever one you like using, hit the subscribe or the follow or any of that. And while you are doing that, you can rate and review us. 5 stars would be nice. A little review would be even better. We really appreciate it. And of course, you could also share the show, and that's just the best. We really appreciate it when people do that. You could also follow us on social media at PiecingPod. Join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces. And I already told you about the Patreon, but don't forget, produced by David Rosen. It's patreon.com/bydavidrosen. Lots of great stuff over there. So let's close this out with a piece of music. Ryan was asking me if I had any Marvin Gaye like music to play at the end. And no, I was just going through some of my stuff. I don't. But instead, this is a nice little movie, CODA, so I'm going to play a nice little piece of music from a short film called To Cherish the Time that I scored a while back for director Chris Johnson. I also released a soundtrack album that compiles the score of a feature film I worked on with Chris Johnson called Beater, and all the music from all the short films I worked with him on, To Cherish the Time being one of those. And this track is called My Love, and again, it is available on the album Beater, which has all this great music that I worked on for various films with Chris Johnson. So check that out, and I hope you enjoy the track, and we'll be back with more Piecing It Together coming up real soon.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.